Hi, I'm Brad Stone with the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, and today we're honoring the life and achievements of Elvis Presley, who passed 47 years ago, and we also wanted to highlight some of his connections with the Civil War in terms of how he was influenced by it and how much of his work centered around it. So to begin with, Elvis was born in Tupelo, Mississippi in 1935, and that was the site of a significant Civil War battle. It was a Union victory. At the age of 13, Elvis and his parents would move to Memphis, Tennessee. That was a very significant strategic area during the Civil War. It was the site of a major naval battle of the Civil War, which resulted in a decisive Union victory and gave the Union possession of that key city for the remainder of the Civil War. Now, throughout his childhood, both in Tupelo and in Memphis, Elvis was surrounded by a lot of the remnants of the Civil War and post-Civil War period, including segregation and Jim Crow laws, which restricted interactions between the white community and the black community. Now, Elvis was unique insofar as he had pretty extensive connections with the black community, particularly in Memphis. And he was very influenced by many aspects of their culture, particularly music, things like rhythm and blues and gospel music. So as he developed his musical career under the tutelage of legendary producer Sam Phillips, he used a lot of that black influences music. He fused it with other influences, and he created his own distinctive style, which of course rocketed him to stardom. But throughout his career, from the inception on, he was always very careful to acknowledge the tremendous contribution that black music and black artists played in the creation of his sound. And indeed, he said that without their influence, there really would have been no rock and roll. He mentioned this in a very important interview he did with Jet magazine in 1957. And again, he would continue to speak out on their contribution to American culture in general. So although he was never formally a member of the civil rights movement, through his work and through his acknowledgement of the black community, Elvis in many ways brought down a lot of the barriers culturally and socially that had existed since the Civil War. Now, speaking of his influences, one of the things that you find in a lot of his work is the influence of the Civil War itself. Indeed, his first film was Love Me Tender, which was set in the Civil War. And the title song of that, which he recorded and which became a big hit, Love Me Tender, was based on a very popular Civil War ballad called Ora Lee. Ora Lee was so popular, it was widely sung by soldiers on both sides. In fact, toward the end of the Civil War, the U.S. Military Academy would adopt that song as an official anthem of the Academy. They changed the lyrics and they gave it the title of Army Blue, and it's still sung today at West Point. Now, speaking of the Army, Elvis was in the United States Army, and there are a couple of aspects of that that relate back to the Civil War. First of all, Elvis was in the Army because he was drafted. And the foundations for the military draft in the United States go back to 1863 during the Civil War, when the Union government instituted the draft. That draft system would be brought back for many subsequent wars, including World War II and throughout most of the Cold War. And that's when Elvis served. Now, one thing to note, big difference between the Civil War and when Elvis served is, at the time of the Civil War, black soldiers were first introduced in a major way to the U.S. Army, but unfortunately they were restricted to segregated units. That segregation would go in the Army all the way up to and through World War II. In 1947, President Truman took the first steps to desegregate the U.S. Army and the rest of the military, and by the time Elvis served in the late 1950s, our military was fully integrated. Now, one other thing that I should mention, since we are a museum of medicine, is that Elvis played a very important role in helping promote public health at a crucial time in our history. During the Civil War, one of the scourges that were out there was smallpox. Now, during the war, they had a vaccine to help prevent people from getting smallpox. But unfortunately, particularly in the Confederacy, there was a lot of vaccine hesitancy because sometimes the vaccine could be improperly made and could cause bad consequences. So during much of the Civil War, Confederate publications would engage in active campaigns to urge people to get vaccinated. Now, fortunately, in the period following the Civil War, through mass immunizations and other public health measures, smallpox ceased to be a major problem in the United States by the 20th century. But something, unfortunately, kind of rose in its place, and that was polio. Polio outbreaks started before the Civil War, but they were very small. But by the time of the 20th century, they got larger and larger. And by the 1950s, tens of thousands of people were being paralyzed and sometimes killed by polio. Well, in 1955, there was a vaccine for polio. It was met with a lot of public appreciation. People signed up to take it. And it was working pretty well until, unfortunately, one of the polio manufacturers didn't process the vaccine properly, and it produced a vaccine that had live virus in it, and it caused a lot of injury. And because of that unfortunate situation, a lot of people stopped taking the polio vaccine, including the community that was most affected by polio, teens and young adults. By 1956, only 0.6% of teens had been vaccinated against polio. Public health officials were concerned, so the New York Health Department, among others, contacted Elvis to see if he'd be willing to publicly get the inoculation, and he did. In 1956, shortly before appearing on the national TV show, The Ed Sullivan Show, Elvis got vaccinated in front of a bunch of cameras, a bunch of film cameras, and that footage was seen across the world. In fact, it became known as the shot scene around the world. It was enormously effective in changing public attitudes. Indeed, in the 6 months following that picture being taken, there was an 80% increase in inoculations among teenagers. So even people during the COVID epidemic look back at Elvis's role in promoting the vaccine as one of the most successful public health campaigns ever done. Now getting back to Elvis, okay, the Civil War influenced a lot of his work, none more importantly than what came to be known as an American Trilogy. That was a song comprised of sort of iconic tunes from the Civil War. Dixie, often associated with the Confederacy. The Bell Hymn of the Republic, which is regarded by many as an anthem for the Union cause. And a song called All My Trials, which was a Black spiritual song in the antebellum South. The American Trilogy was first developed and recorded by a country artist named Mickey Newbury in 1971. Elvis would record it the following year, but he gave far more prominence to the Bell Hymn of the Republic in his version. It would be featured in a song, it would be featured in a concert that Elvis would give in 1973. It was a real landmark concert called Aloha from Hawaii via satellite. It was the first major concert that was broadcast live to much of the world via satellite. And that song, an American Trilogy, was very heavily featured. And indeed, most critics and fans of that concert say it was the highlight of that concert. For the rest of his career, until his untimely death at age 42, in 1977, Elvis would continue to perform that song, and it, is a lasting tribute to America. On this anniversary of Elvis's passing, we want to note Elvis's remarkable life, how it was connected with some important aspects of the Civil War. And we also wanted to say that he continues to be a very iconic figure in our history. So I want to thank you for listening to this, and as Elvis would say, thank you. Thank you very much.